Hey, so I know that I usually appear on camera at the start of these videos, more out of tradition than anything else at this point, but as I record this there is a heatwave in the UK and I really don't want to get under, hot studio lights with all the windows closed. It would be unpleasant. Anyway, miniatures. Sometimes they have paint on them. Occasionally that paint was applied by me. Occasionally. Let's take a look at what I've done. First up, we have a third-party Grot mega tank that I was sent in the Grots box. For those curious, there's an unboxing video over on the main channel, and thank you to everyone who contributed to it. This model originally comes from Geargut's mech shop, although I have modified it a bit since, well, it's me. I don't really have much experience working with 3D printed minis, so this was a bit of a testbed for that. You know, figuring out how the material is to work with, what can be easily fixed and what can't, that kind of stuff. Size-wise, it's a little smaller than the official model, but not so much that I imagine anyone would complain about it in a casual game. Although I suppose if you were printing it yourself, you could just make it a little bigger. I assume you can do that? Look, I try and keep ignorant of 3D printing so I don't end up wanting to buy a 3D printer. To me, it's just a kind of magic box that some people have. Of course, I also painted some Grots. The first 5 are pretty standard, just modified in the same ways that I normally do, but a couple of them are a little special. This first one has a small power claw I built from scratch using plasticard, and the second is a Space Marine cosplayer, which was just an idea I thought would be kind of fun, although I think the only part of him that's actually from a Space Marine kit is the chainsword. Well, okay, technically there's a bit of RTB01 sprue in his backpack too. In-game, these do nothing special, they're just Grots, but one of the fun things about Grots is that their equipment is all over the place, even on the official models, so even if one looks more heavily armed or armoured than another, you can just assume their better gear doesn't work very well, so the stats remain the same. Now, well, I may have made a mini from scratch. It's a little rough, but this is supposed to be a tiny little Mothman based on some doodles I did a little while ago whilst watching a Mothman documentary. And yes, he does have a tiny, well-defined arse as a reference to the statue in Point Pleasant. He's mostly green stuff and paper clips, and whilst I'm no stranger to fabricating things using green stuff, making an entire mini is not something I have much experience with, so this was all very much a learning experience. The paint job is pretty much just dry brushing outside of the eyes, so not much to report there. Now I just need to find a way to sneak him into a 40k game. Oh, and remember when I said I was going to slowly collect an authentically Rogue Trader Lamenter's army? Well, I painted a couple more models for it. This first one is from the first proper batch of Space Marine models that use a similar design to the LE2 Marine, and so is a little smaller than most of the already small Rogue Trader Marines. Really happy with how he came out, although the iconography on the shoulder was a nightmare due to its wonky proportions and cramped location. Also thought I should probably add some first edition style graffiti on a few of these, so that's how he got the kill written on his gun. The second Lamenter was originally supposed to be a captain with a bionic arm of some kind, but I'll be using him as a sergeant. Had to put the checks and heart symbol on the blade of his stabby hand, since there wasn't any space for it on his shoulder, so I'd like you all to appreciate how small that heart is because I nearly went cross-eyed painting that. I think I've mentioned this before, but if you want to replicate this yellow yourself, it's just Averland Sunset with a Reikland Flesh Shade wash in the recesses and a highlight of Dawn Yellow. I think it's a nice shade that plays off the slightly cartoony look of these old models nicely. Both of these were sent in by Seamus in his magical bag of Rogue Trader models that I never seem to run out of, so again, thank you very much. Viewers from the main channel will have seen these next two already, but these are a pair of Fishmen from Wargames Foundry, but used to be made by Citadel. Honestly, it's a whole thing, hence why we did a full video on them. Anyway, these were surprisingly okay to paint. The detailing around the mouths and the straps around the legs were a bit fiddly and sometimes ill-defined, but otherwise they were okay. The skin was mostly done with washes and dry brushes too, so it was a pretty quick job. The original sculpts were from around 1982, so they're also some of the oldest models I've ever painted, even if they aren't original castings. Now let's get to some models that have been in my pile of shame for a long time. First up is a Marauder from Mantic's Dead Zone line. We've had these for years and I thought it was time to finally get some paint on them. Usually they're shown with green skin, Marauders being Mantic's legally distinct space orcs, but I decided to paint them red since I've wanted to paint red orcs for a while and haven't really had much excuse. The recipe was super simple too, just Word Bearers red, washed with Druchii violet and dry brushed with Mephiston red. This was a test to see how to paint the rest of the minis in the box, so hopefully I can get some more of those painted, before the end of the decade. Likewise, I painted up an Enforcer, also from Mantic. I was originally going to paint him yellow since I'm apparently on a yellow kick recently, but I settled on blue with yellow accents in the end. Sadly, this model does show off one of the issues I've found with the Enforcer models. The details get a bit vague in places, and on this one the head is one of those places that's affected by it, and that's a place you tend to notice since, humans gravitate to looking at other humans' faces. Maybe this has been improved with more modern castings since these particular ones are pretty old now, but it's something to bear in mind. Still, after so much GW stuff, it is nice to occasionally paint a more realistically proportioned person. Finally, I painted up this Necron Royal Warden that I got in issue 1 of Imperium magazine. I actually bought the magazine for the Space Marine because it was just £3 for the issue, but I ended up getting enamoured with the idea of painting a yellow Necron. It's the exact same recipe as my Lamentus from earlier, although I will admit it was a pain to put this model together since its parts are interconnected in such a way that you can't easily paint him in assemblies unless you just don't assemble him. Still, I'm quite happy with the final model. It's always fun to see a Necron in non-metallic colours. So that was 16 models painted, bringing my totals for this year up to 39 models painted against 29 models bought, which means I've caught up with where I should be to hit my modest goal of painting 52 models in the year. That was thrown off somewhat by spending so much time on that Shadow Sword. Granted, I never got around to actually finishing those Man of War ships that I said I would in the last video, but long-term viewers of this series should know by now to never actually expect me to follow through on anything I say I'm going to paint, because I'll inevitably get distracted by painting a yellow Necron or a Goblin or whatever. But to move on to your minis that have been going past on screen, you've all been busy little buggers over the last 2 months, haven't you? Once again, I'm sorry I couldn't include everything that was submitted, there's just too much. But I do always pop the thread in the description, so you can go and check out the replies there, and maybe find some new hobbyists to follow over on the hell site that is Twitter. But for now, I wish you all well, and I'll see you next time.